Hello and welcome to this post on Viking archaeology, in which I will discuss the archaeology of great halls and the rulers who ruled them. Now, great farms and halls of kings and chieftains, in short the elite of Viking-age society, is one of the major themes of Viking archaeology. We've always known from poetry and written sources that the kings and chieftains' residences were hubs of political power in society. In particular, the monumental feasting halls, where rulers generously hosted their followers, was where you truly go to win both friends and enemies in Viking society. One place where this has always been apparent is in the poetry, such as the Beowulf poem, where we can read about halls like these. He handed down orders for men to work on a great mead hall, meant to be a wonder of the world forever. It would be his throne room, and there he would dispense his God-given goods to young and old. This is how the poem describes King Hrothgar's building of the great hall Herod. And if you want to know what people did in such a hall, Beowulf can also tell us. And the party sat, proud in their bearing, strong and stalwart. An attendant stood by with a decorated pitcher, pouring bright helpings of mead. And the minstrel sang, filling Herod with his head-cleaning voice. For many years, archaeology vaguely knew about such places from other areas and contexts than Scandinavia. For example, the Anglo-Saxon king's seat, Jævring in Northumberland, or places such as the chieftain's farm Hofstadir in Iceland. But it was only in 1986 that something happened when the archaeologist Tom Christensen from Roskilde Museum in Denmark began excavating at Lejre, which is in fact the place where many believe the early Danish kings remembered in Beowulf and other legends resided. And what Tom and his team found were the remains of a magnificent monumental building, in fact a whole series of monumental buildings, the largest of them 48 meters long, 11 meters wide, and being built, destroyed and rebuilt on the same spot for generations and centuries. This looked really like a legend come true. Work at Lejre continued, but so did work in other sites where hall buildings of this size and magnitude started to appear. One of the first places was also at Sjælland in Denmark, where the site Tissø was investigated by Lars Jørgensen from the Danish National Museum. Tissø had come into focus already in 1977 when a huge gold ring was found in the lake near the site. And in the early 1990s, metal detectorists started to find extraordinary finds on the site. And when it was excavated, the results showed not just the remains of a great hall on the model of something like Lejre, but also the surroundings of this building or this series of buildings, because again we were concerned with an area which had been renewed generation after generation for several hundred years, from long before the Viking Age started and until around year 1000. What could be seen at Tissø was a complex that included the Great Hall and a fenced area adjacent to it with a very special building, surmised to be a cult building. This interpretation was brought out by some of the many finds from Tissø, which seem to have a ritual character and to suggest cultic activities at the lake, but also at the site of the farm itself. And Lars Jørgensen for many years pursued this theme of the rituals at Tissø. Now the full story about that we'll sadly never learn, because Lars sadly died before he could publish his synthesis of the project. But the structure that was seen at Tissø began to appear in other sites like Järrestad in Skåne or Huseby at Kaupang, sites with confirmed aspects of the same layout, with a great wooden building constructed in the middle and a special area around it. One site which brought the character of the supposed ritual building out was Uppåkra in Skåne, in southern Sweden, where the hall still remains to be excavated. We know from trial excavations that it's there, but what has been excavated is exactly the cultic building that was next to the hall, and that gave quite extraordinary finds, including this magnificent beaker with gold applications, and numerous other finds which clearly speak to that ritual function of that building, that very special space. So what has happened recently? What's new in the archaeology of Viking great halls? Well, one thing that's really important and is still fairly new is this book, the final publication of the excavations at Lejre. So this is more than 20 years of fieldwork which has been brought together in print. Over 500 pages. We can now follow all the finer details of the Lejre excavations. In Danish, that is, I should say, but so much more reason to learn if you can't. The Lejre complex turns out to be something that exists for about 500 years and is renewed constantly at the same place. There's not as many finds at Lejre as there is at Tissø, so there's clearly a distinction between activities at these sites that we don't fully understand yet. I should also flag up that if you want to see for yourself what the Lejre Great Hall might have looked like, you can actually go and do so very soon, because over the last few years a full-scale replica has been built at the extraordinary reenactment park, the Land of Legends near Lejre, and it's due to open this month in June. So if you can get to Denmark, you should certainly pay it a visit and get a full impression of what this kind of architecture would appear like and what it would do to you. Another place which certainly has news is Borre in Norway, which is famous for its Iron and Viking-age monumental burial mounds, and especially one grave that was found in one of these mounds. Now, in around 1990, there was a great project to try and understand the context of those mounds. And just like the Lejre project, it has actually appeared in print now. Bjørn Muir's book on the Borre project was finished before he died, and we can now understand at least what was found out back then. This came out in 2015, but since then, quite extraordinary things has happened at Borre. This is due to ground-penetrating radar surveys which have been done at the site of the mounds, but also in the surroundings, and have shown, amongst other things, a landing site with traces of jetties. But what it has also shown is an area with at least 3 great buildings which must correspond to the kind of halls seen at Lejre and other sites. They're not excavated yet, but ground-penetrating radar has given a very detailed image of what is below the surface. Another place where geophysics has also been used to reveal hall buildings is at Aska in Östergötland in Sweden. Aska is famous for its rich Viking-age female burial, which was found and excavated under a cairn in 1920. But in 2014, Martin Rundqvist and Andreas Wiberg published a ground-penetrating radar survey that revealed the detailed plan of an almost 50-meter long building at a platform very near to the Aska Mound. Again, the architecture closely resembles that seen at Lejre at other sites. Again, it has not been excavated yet, but Martin tells me that he has now plans for an upcoming campaign, so watch this space if you want to know where the Aska lady lived. Gamla Uppsala, the center of Middle Sweden, was also the site of a royal manor, which has been famous from legend, just as a Lejre hall. It's also famous for its necropolis with the great burial mounds from the 4th and 5th centuries onwards. But since 2011, the project Gamla Uppsala, the emergence of a mythical center, has conducted new excavations and survey there. And in 2017, a very interesting report came out on the results so far. What they show is a continuous settlement and production area from around 450 until 1200. A hall building was previously partly excavated in 1990 to 92, but the new excavations have revealed more and now show again a building of approximately 50 meters length, 12 meters wide, a timbered hall with 4 monumental gates. What's also interesting from these excavations is that it's clear that this structure was ritually burned down sometime in the 700s. This is clear from the way that the burned down house has been treated, with the remaining posts are carefully dragged up and with objects deposited in the remains, including these extraordinary iron fittings which must have been placed presumably on the roof of the building. And perhaps, if you want to, you can imagine these as the scales of a dragon's back, or is it a little animal in itself, a little snake with a mouth that we see. The project has also found traces of other activities, other large buildings going back to the 600s and onwards, with extensive traces of jewelry productions. And lately, or relatively lately, in 2017, excavations have revealed traces of earlier burned down buildings beneath the hall. So there's lots still to be found at Gamla Uppsala, despite this being a site that has been excavated for 300 years. There are other new hall sites emerging. Järrestad in Jutland in Denmark was first located in 2015. At that time, it wasn't quite clear what it was. It was just clear that something major was here from the Viking period. Now, at that time, it was widely suggested that perhaps big halls did not exist in Jutland. Perhaps there was a different settlement pattern there. But the excavations that have been conducted at Järrestad since 2016 has shown that at least one great hall clearly existed there. And today we can see that this is a site which clearly follows the pattern set by Tissø and Lejre, complete with a small enclosed area with a special building. This is still very new, and excavations have been ongoing for the last few years, and every year new details have appeared. So just like Asker, this is a place to watch if you want to know what's the newest in Viking archaeology. Järrestad is set in a very special landscape. It's actually one of the few places where you can have a full view of the Little Belt, one of the 3 main passages or key passages between the Baltic Sea and the North Sea. So this was clearly a very strategic point to be in a maritime society. It's also an important land passage between Jutland and the Danish islands. So again, this site was not just a monumental site, it was a monumental site that was set at a very powerful place in the landscape. The landscape is also what characterizes the last place I'm going to mention, and that is Avaldsnes in western Norway. We don't know what the hall in Avaldsnes looked like. It's probably hidden under some of the later medieval buildings, because at Avaldsnes, one of the things that set the investigations into motion was the fact that this was a site that was famous from the sagas and had also been a royal site in the later Middle Ages in Norway. So there's lots of activity over many hundred years. What the Avaldsnes project, which has been running for a number of years, have revealed instead is that process and the context of the site. And I'm flagging it up just because another great book has appeared very recently in 2020, which is actually the second publication of the Avaldsnes project, which not only details the great excavations which have been going on there, but also the investigations into the context of that those monuments, including the ship graves at Avaldsnes, which is something I'll talk about in a later post. Now, this was all that I had about new sites. Where will it take us in the future? One person who has an idea about what should be done to the archaeology of Viking halls and their rulers is Trine Borage, who recently defended her PhD dissertation at Aarhus University. And Trine has been looking at Tissø and other complexes and noted how some of the ways that we approach them is still caught up in theoretical frames which were developed in the 1980s and 90s. And to some extent we remain perhaps awestruck by the power language that Viking rulers developed, because it's still new and extraordinary to us as an archaeological discovery. Perhaps our next step should not be to find more new halls, but to investigate what people did there, not only what the rulers tried to do, but how people responded to that, how they followed their rulers in some ways, but might have been foot-dragging in other respects. For places where conflict is so visible in terms of halls being built, burned down and rebuilt again, this is actually a very obvious perspective to take, and something that could perhaps lead us into new insights into the power games that these places were clearly part of. Now, I want to thank you for following me for this little update on Viking Great Halls, and I hope you'll join me again for other posts on Viking archaeology.